system readiness and the activities that have been undertaken within the operations team and many businesses to get ready for the summer ahead. First off, I'll just jump straight into the outlook. This is a bit of an overview slide, and I'll provide some commentary on this slide on the way through, and then provide a little bit more detail at the back end of the pack. Don't be too put off by the colours. I'll call it the bright purple, the pale purple, and the deep purple, just for want of better descriptions, but just to try and canvass the way we see this outlook compared to our average summers or our previous ones. In terms of heat waves and conditions, similar above median temperatures are expected for most of Australia. So not necessarily seeing a big change in terms of the summer outlook or in terms of weather for the period. So in short, at this point in time, expecting average conditions. It's fair to say leading into the last summer, we're watching a lot of environmental conditions that were a lot more concerning. The current forecast doesn't suggest that. Notwithstanding that, bushfire risk is as it is every summer within Australian context. A few challenging areas indicating some risk, but notwithstanding that and some above average parts of Queensland and Western Vic, it looks like very similar conditions that we would experience in a similar summer in Australia. In terms of widespread flooding, the current outlook is for above a median rainfall during the period for New South Wales and inland Queensland. So a bit of an ongoing risk in terms of flooding and activity. And of course, that brings with it lots of weather attributes that we'd be all used to. The one that I think is really painting an interesting picture, we'll jump into at the back end of the pack, is the record maximum and minimum demands. Lots written about the minimum demands for the spring period, but it's also an ongoing risk for the summer period as well. Got quite a good reminder this year in Queensland in February, record maximum demand as well. And that probably paints a little bit of a picture of the operating environment and challenges that we expected to be confronted for in the summer ahead. In terms of generation availability, we've done our sweep of obviously new plant availability that have come into the market over the last 12 months. We also see some retirement and availability of other plant, which we'll go into in a little bit more detail. But on balance, it's sort of similar or unchanged compared to the plant lineup of the previous year, or at least the availability compared to demand. Network outages, what we would call traditionally high impact outages, generally similar to what they were the previous year, but do have the potential to get a bit worse. There's some large number of outages, particularly in Victoria, which are on our minds, and some impactful outages as well through the other states, which we probably just need to keep an eye on and manage. Having said that, we have had summer conditions that are actually quite favourable for outages as well. So we probably just need to stay a little bit agile to both allow work to be done there and not adversely impact on markets and participants, and at the same time ensure that we keep the power system secure. In terms of reliability, many of you will be familiar with the ESU that we published a little bit earlier in the year. It did identify a forecast reliability gap for New South Wales, South Australia and Victoria. Lots of detail in that particular report about loss of load probability and where it stands, and I'll talk briefly about the interim reliability reserves and about the RERT program for the summer period ahead. In terms of fuel supplies, they look similar or unchanged to the previous period. We've done our work together with market participants in looking at supply readiness and energy limitations for the period ahead, and it's largely unchanged, together with the health of markets, which are also looking largely unchanged for the period ahead. I'm going to whiz past weather and climate because I know we've got Ashley back on the line, and I'll give Ashley a chance to talk about that in a little bit more detail. In terms of generation availability, I mentioned earlier, we've got Caloid C back on, and you can see there's some step changes that relate to battery energy storage systems that have progressively come online during the last period and are obviously available for the summer ahead, which is really encouraging. Coal stockpiles are generally at normal levels throughout the NEM, which is, I think, quite helpful and encouraging for this time of year. But we do have lots of plant movements, and with that plant movements, we've got some pretty significant outages that are actually occurring prior to summer. And the thing that's always on our mind is just those return to service dates and timeframes. When we get into the short-term passive time horizons, it's pretty heavily dependent on ensuring that those key plant return to service at those critical times. So we'll need to keep a bit of a careful look on that. And of course, the market and the industry will be advised through our market notices when at any point in time in which that changes and in the event that the risk materialises. Also worth me highlighting just on this particular slide, it was remiss of me in the start not to talk about our summer. Our summer is typically 1st of November through to the 31st of March. And generally the reason why we use that broader definition for summer is our operational conditions are more likely to be experienced or challenged within that window. We've certainly had interventions in November that are probably more reflective of a challenging summer environment, and we've definitely had them much later in the summer season in March as well. So we generally try and look at that period of time as a time for the risks in which we're trying to manage as best we can. In terms of operational demand, I guess the trend and the thing that I'd probably encourage you to think about here as you look at both the minimum and the maximum operating dimensions for summer is just look at the breadth of operating conditions. Obviously in South Australia, you can see there we've now got some negative demand starting to come into place in the minimum profiles. The maximum demands notionally haven't grown significantly with the exception of Queensland. And of course, Tasmania continues to be a winter peaking state. Notwithstanding that, no significant step changes in the maximum profiles, but consistent with our ESU forecasts, the minimum system load and demand projections continue to fall pretty rapidly. Got a very good, very strong indication of that throughout spring. And there are operational conditions in summer for which that we know that minimum demand profiles could be also optimised. And the things that are on our mind, weekends, public holidays, are very strong track records for very low demands. Combine that with the right weather conditions, and we could find we could have some pretty extraordinary periods leading into summer, obviously with very high penetrations of rooftop PV. In terms of high impact outages and augmentations, the numbers probably don't tell the complete story, but it gives you a bit of a sense of the trends. Bit of a step change in the Victorian numbers, many of those being driven by connection works and asset works, as you'd expect. One thing that's on my mind in relation to this is just also taking those opportunities when they appear from time to time. We've worked very closely with the TNSPs. We have a protocol, a guideline and procedure in place where we can actually look at outages for the summer period. I think it's challenged by the fact, obviously, many workforces are also taking a break throughout the Christmas New Year's period. But either side of that shoulder, you have sometimes got the opportunity to take outages. So we'll manage that very carefully with the TNSPs and obviously do the forecasts that are necessary to ensure that the risks don't materialise. In terms of interregional augmentations, a couple of interesting things are happening there. QNI increases, although only marginal at 50 megawatts, are certainly the thing that we're tracking at the moment through the test phase, and Project Energy Connect progressively getting released through the summer period up to 150 megawatts, consistent with its timetable as well. And obviously some minor changes there as well for Basslink transfer increases. So in short, these are the planned outages, of course, and we've obviously throughout the summer period, we'll watch the storm activity very carefully. The last period of time, as many of you are aware, pretty significant asset impacts on the line out to Broken Hill and also lines in SA. And some of those conditions, of course, can materialise at different times, which of course we need to watch very carefully. Just moving on to gas system readiness. Obviously, this is generally the time of year that the gas plant and operators get their chance to undertake lots of maintenance. So you'll notice at the moment, lots of outages taking place throughout the gas system, lots of monitoring and inspections taking place and picking on lines, on pipelines rather. Also at the moment, the capacity and over time and throughout December, we'll see Longford reduce pretty significantly from its peak operating capacity. That will obviously mean in times of demand and when necessary, you'll have some discharge through storage facilities, and you'll also have the movement of gas through Queensland at that point of time as well. So that can lead to some price impacts, some high spot prices in Queensland. But again, that's very load dependent. In the context of energy supply, it's really GPG demand, and the need where that may arise is that one thing we'd need to watch throughout the period ahead. On our mind is the refilling of Iona storage for this period of time. We had a threat published very earlier in the year, which unfortunately didn't materialise, was managed very well by industry and participants. Now we're in that phase at the moment where we're watching Iona very carefully to ensure its readiness, not just for this operating period of summer, but for the winter ahead as well. In terms of gas supply adequacy, you can see what we've actually forecast in the range and the range of availabilities there. We have had a particularly cold winter. Gas storage levels are low, certainly lower than they have been historically. With more VRE now factoring into the environment, that progressive change and dependency on GPG at times is probably now starting to materialise more and more in the operational timeframes. I know this is a component part of future planning, but from an operations perspective, we would certainly see at different times and different plant configurations and weather outputs, GPG being called to duty a little bit more. It's not an unreasonable expectation, together with lots of new large-scale battery storage as well. Mentioned Iona storage earlier. It did get particularly low for the period, probably something we just need to keep a little bit of an eye on. You can see it at about 13.9 petajoules now. It's tracking in the right direction, but of course with those changes in configuration in the gas system, it always has that potential impact throughout December to either run flat as it has in previous years, or perhaps not grow and fill as much as we would like. We probably just need to keep an careful eye on that for the period ahead. In terms of operations and readiness, these are probably the key things on our mind at the moment. Resource preparedness is probably key. Generation availability and fuel, we'll talk about that in just a moment. Transmission availability I've referred to. RERT and IRR, obviously critical tools for us to have in our toolkit for the period ahead. Supplementary capacity mechanisms for the WEM, and we've of course got some new East Coast gas system functions as well. I'll dive into a few of those. In terms of RERT for the period ahead, we've maintained that panel of service providers for the summer period. One thing to keep in mind for the summer period ahead as it relates to interim reliability reserves is that these are the gaps that we did publish in the ESU. It was a gap of 200 megawatts in South Australia, 10 in Vic and 265 in New South Wales. So we've been seeking to procure IRR in those in New South Wales and South Australia particularly. The 10 megawatt gap in Victoria is proposed to be covered by short notice RERT. Why is this different? Well, this is different because we of course pay availability payments for IRR to ensure that those reserves are contractually available when required. Reserves contracted through IRR cannot also be offered in the short notice RERT program, and typically it's the same providers. So I guess the quantity of availability is not quite, might not necessarily increase, although we are getting some marginal increases, but it does mean you have the assurance that they're available when you need them. In terms of summer readiness, thank you for everyone that's participated in our readiness programs and training. I know for the last SMS training that we've been undertaking, there's been a lot of involvement from those in the industry, particularly in some of the system restarts and the lessons learned from previous seasons. I think we've only got one or two still to come. This reflects our training program in an annual cycle. I think collectively we feel as though we've been able to test the readiness of new operating procedures as much as we can. Of course, that's challenging at the moment because there's a lot of change and a lot of adaptation for both the industry and for AEMO. But I feel as though we're tracking reasonably well in the operational space as it relates to training and to be able to forecast as best we can the possible events and scenarios that we may be confronted with. Just on all things emergency management, some of you may have participated in either the NGRAC or TNSP exercises or jurisdictional exercises or our own. Been over a dozen exercises undertaken in the last 12 months. I think they've been really fruitful. Lots of lessons that will be carried through to the summer period ahead, and of course, any emergencies that we might experience throughout the calendar. Communications and stakeholder management. Obviously, we've had an ACCC interim authorisation in which we've worked with TNSPs and generators, very targeted coordination view of assets and availability throughout the summer period. That's proved very helpful. Quite a lot of jurisdictional engagement through the emergency exercises, but also through our ESU and our projections for the summer ahead. So we feel as though very close relationships with all the jurisdictions in terms of our expected operating conditions and some of those risks that may materialise. We've been very targeted engagement in that respect. This is our whole of industry briefing today, and of course we'll do another briefing at a consumer forum in December, together with a more detailed briefing and overview for ministers when they next meet. During summer, I think we kicked off today our Emergency Coordinations Forum, so our weekly catch-ups for both jurisdictions and for industry. They will continue throughout the summer period ahead. I'm very pleased when they meet and don't have a great deal to talk about. But of course, it's a forum for us, should we need it, to actually be able to escalate more actively in that environment. And of course, full use of our digital platforms will be available to all of us. In terms of the risk, touched on a few of these things, but probably didn't talk a great deal about the mitigations. Some of these forced outages, whether they be network outages or generation outages, we have some tools in our toolkit, but of course we also do a lot of contingency planning and mitigations for those risks throughout the year. The root panel is particularly helpful, but as are our tools and forecasts. The key thing there for us is contemporary information, which is getting the most up-to-date information from participants into our systems so we can use our systems to assess the levels of risk that may exist. In terms of bushfire risks, we've been engaging directly with the TNSPs regarding their asset plans and asset management, just to get regular updates from them in terms of their vegetation management programs, and quite encouraged by the position that they're currently all in, and feel as though they've certainly covered their work programs in that respect with lots of contingency plans in place. Extreme heat for the period ahead. It is summer, and even though we might talk about average conditions, it does sometimes test the plant ratings for both TNSPs and for participants. So we'll try as best we possibly can to get those notices out in advance of extreme temperature days. And of course, our passer availability will be adjusted based on those weather conditions as they occur. Network and generation maintenance and commissioning activities. There's lots of commissioning activities taking place at the moment, so we need to be mindful to try and manage those outages, and where we can accommodate them in specific periods, try very hard to do so. Storms and flash flooding I mentioned a little bit earlier. Probably not a great deal to talk about there other than the risk management of the specific asset owners. But always on our mind is the unplanned network events during high or low periods of demand. So the minimum demand framework that we have in place, and minimum demands in particular, are extremely sensitive to asset outages and status and coal plant configurations. So we do need to watch very carefully the way that materialises and some of those risks from time to time. The threats to system security and reliability, I won't step through all of these. I talked about the increases in capacity in some of those interregional investments as they're taking place, but also the sensitivity of the return to service dates of lots of generating plant. If you look at the hit list there, these are pretty significant assets for which the ability for them to return to service at key dates and times become absolutely critical for us. Folks, that's all I was hoping to cover in relation to summer readiness today. As Hayley mentioned earlier, we will make the pack available at a later date, and probably throw through to Ashley now if she's on and available to talk about our weather forecast.
Thank you so much, Michael. Sorry, my internet cut out before. Very bad timing. I'll just share my slides. Okay, here we are. Okay, so my name's Ashley Madden. I'm the head communications meteorologist here at Weather Zone. I'll be going through the summer outlook with you guys today. So you may have noticed from the head slide that it now says DTN. We got acquired by them 3 years ago. Now we've officially made the name change. So business as usual, but our name is now DTN. So agenda, I'll go through the state of the climate. So what's happening with all the climate drivers and how that will influence our outlook going forward. So let's start with ENSO, or the El Nino Southern Oscillation. It's one of Australia's most impactful climate drivers. So we have 3 phases to it. We did have three consecutive years of La Nina, which generally brings wetter and I wouldn't say cooler, but more moderate temperatures to parts of Australia. El Nino, which we had last spring, which led to really warm and dry conditions. So summer, though, we saw that peter out a little bit, but generally El Nino brings warmer and drier conditions to parts of Australia. And neutral is about normal. So you may have noticed that the Bureau issued a La Nina watch earlier this year. That was based on the cool sea surface temperatures that we've seen through the Central and Eastern Pacific. So on the left-hand side, this is what we typically need with a La Nina: cooler oceans through the central eastern Pacific. Around Australia, the oceans typically are warmer than average, which enhances rainfall, cloud, humidity, and generally can bring above average rain and increase that risk of heavy rainfall and flooding. So you can see on the right, that's the observations. Yeah, we have seen cooling through the central eastern Pacific. It does look quite like that graphic on the left. We haven't met that threshold yet, though. So on the bottom left, we're still in neutral conditions in terms of the oceans. In terms of the Bureau's definition, it looks unlikely that they'll actually officially declare it this year. There's only 1 out of 7 models predicting La Nina. The other 6 are predicting neutral conditions. Of that one that's predicting it, it looks like a relatively short event. So just from that December to February or March period. So the one thing I do want to note, though, is I guess with global warming and the changing climate, the climatologists have been looking at the relative Nino 3.4 index. So the normal Nino 3.4 index highlights the section of the ocean in the middle of the Pacific, whereas the relative takes into account the whole of the equator's ocean temperatures. So in this climate, it is a bit more, I guess with global warming and stuff, it is a bit more reflective of what's happening with the ocean or how cool that section of the ocean is. So it is actually, that index is about 0.55 degrees Celsius lower. So it actually has met, if we were to go with the relative Nino 3.4 index, it actually has met that La Nina threshold. This isn't actually used by the Bureau yet or any other organisation around the globe because we haven't had enough research in terms of this. We're kind of entered uncharted waters. But that being said, the Bureau unlikely to declare it this year. I think it looks like other organisations around the globe may. So this is the CPC IRI. They're giving La Nina a 75% chance of developing spring, early summer. You can see by autumn they're forecasting it to return back to neutral conditions. The thing about these guys, though, is their threshold's a bit easier to make. It's negative 0.5, whereas ours is negative 0.8. So it's most likely that we'll see these guys declare it and a couple of other organisations, but not the Bureau. Regardless, it looks like we could see some La Nina-like conditions around Australia. So that could enhance the rainfall across northern and eastern parts of Australia. I wouldn't expect cooler maximums in this climate. So yeah, with Sydney, for example, in 2010, 2012, we had a really strong La Nina. Even then, Sydney didn't have below average maximums in January. So this is taking into account years before 2000. So with global warming, I wouldn't expect this, but yes, it can moderate maximum temperatures closer to average. And that's what we could see this season. Generally, La Nina can also increase the frequency of heat waves. So generally you see more high pressure sitting over southern Australia, but generally the risk of max heat is less intense. The other one I wanted to talk about is the Indian Ocean Dipole. It's similar, but similar to ENSO, but it happens in the Indian Ocean, the other side of Australia. So it has been in the negative side for the past 5 weeks. So this is more of a spring-like phenomenon when the monsoon arrives in Australia, which is generally in that December period. This is when this breaks down. So officially the Bureau need about 8 weeks below this threshold. So yeah, it's unlikely that they'll actually declare it. They may declare it for a couple of weeks, but in terms of a fully fledged event, it's unlikely to be fully declared. So it's neutral, but we're in a negative-like pattern. So what does that mean? Generally warmer waters off the northwest shelf of Australia. Our cold fronts that move west to east can tap into this tropical moisture and bring cloud, rainfall, thunderstorm activity. So we have seen that a lot recently in terms of thunderstorm activity through parts of WA, South Australia, also Queensland, New South Wales. There's been a lot of moisture around Australia, which is enhancing this activity. So in the next 3 weeks or so before the monsoon arrives, that's where we could see these conditions continue. So you can see it does really impact southeastern parts of Australia. So you can see the higher deciles there, decile 9 for those areas. It can cool maximums as well because of the cloud and rain, but I wouldn't expect below average at the moment. We've had two unprecedented events this year. So we had, so the Tongan volcano in 2022, I didn't get that date wrong. A study showed that 2 years later, which was in, summer this year and also autumn, it showed that it basically created a positive phase of SAM. And positive SAM means high pressure sitting over southern Australia. It forces those cold fronts and wind-bearing systems further south. So that's why we saw really low wind during those summer and autumn months. And yeah, parts of southern Australia saw really dry conditions. That was interrupted by a sudden stratospheric warming event, which meant that we saw negative SAM during July and August. So we saw an increase in frontal activity during that time. With the Tongan volcano, it looks like there's still some residual moisture in the atmosphere, in the stratosphere, that could influence us through summer. So that's why we're expecting we could see more phases of positive SAM during summer. So SAM, Southern Annual Mode. So yeah, you can see here from the graphic that we are expecting it to be positive at least for the next month or so. And generally over the summer months, we're expecting more phases of positive. Obviously, you get negative and positive throughout the time. It sways between each, but on average, we're expecting more positive phases of SAM. And that's actually what we saw last summer, even though we had El Nino. Positive SAM creates onshore flow for the east coast, which can enhance rainfall cloud. And that's coming off really warm sea surface temperatures at the moment. So that's what we're expecting could occur this summer as well. Generally, it forces those cold fronts further south. So that means generally you see lower wind in positive phases of SAM. And generally more settled weather. Things are a bit more stagnant though, so that's why you can see the potential for increased chance of heat waves across southern Australia. Negative SAM's opposite, so that's where you see those cold fronts pass further north than normal. So generally windier conditions, rain in the winter months, you see more rain, but summer not so much. Eastern parts of Australia, generally the winds are from the west, so they're drier and warmer. Last one, sea surface temperatures. You can see 23, 24 in the top right, much well above every other year that we've seen. So record hot levels in terms of sea surface temperatures. The waters off the northwest are super warm enough to sort of support a cyclone already actually. So they're about 29 degrees. And the waters off the east coast are super warm as well. So we're expecting that could add moisture into the atmosphere, fueling rain and thunderstorms. And also we're expecting an exceptionally humid summer based on these sea surface temperatures. So is neutral, but we could see that La Nina-like pattern develop late spring into summer. The IOD is neutral as well, negative-like pattern for the remainder of spring. SAM is positive. We're expecting more positive phases throughout the summer as well, and the sea surface temperatures are much warmer. So what does all this mean for the outlook? So I thought I'd show rainfall first because this is the models are pretty much showing a cut copy of what you would expect if La Nina was to occur. So this to me, this is why I was speaking about the relative Nino 3.4 index, even though it's not used at the moment. Potentially that's what the models are kind of hinting at here with the increased rainfall over northern and eastern parts of Australia in particular. This could increase cloud cover as well and reduce solar during these months. But yeah, northern and eastern in particular, it looks like quite a lot of rain. In terms of forecast temperatures, minimums we're expecting to be in the top 10 in terms of summers. So the sea surface temperatures around Australia are going to moderate those temperatures. So we're expecting warm minimums. We could see prolonged periods of warm nights as well, so associated with that. Maximum temperatures, so this is quite surprising given probably everything you've seen. So the models, again, are going quite heavy for the rainfall in these months. You can see December in particular, the rain is kind of matching that cooler temperatures that we're seeing. So in my mind, we wouldn't expect those cooler temperatures unless we saw a monsoon onset during that time and for a couple of weeks. So that's what the models are heavily relying on in December. So when the monsoon does arrive, we could see some cooler temperatures across northern and central parts of Australia. But I wouldn't expect this cool in terms of maximum temperatures. And you'll see in the next couple of slides for all the capital cities is not really affecting the main centres in terms of those cooler maximums. So Adelaide, maximum temperatures are expected to be above average for the next 6 months or so. Minimums also above average for Adelaide. In terms of extreme heat, so this is the days above 35 degrees between October and April. So we're forecasting 19 days this season. So yeah, it's on the higher end of what we've seen in the past couple of years in terms of Adelaide's extreme heat. So it does look quite warm in that area. Melbourne, it looks like we could see some hotter days, but then also some cooler days associated with some cloud and rain as well. So the temperatures are a bit more moderated in Melbourne. You can see with the extreme heat, we're forecasting 9 days above 35 degrees in Melbourne. Hobart, above average maximum and minimums temperatures as well. In terms of days above 35 degrees, Hobart doesn't typically get that many, but we're expecting 2 days. The forecast is for 2 days this season, so that's about average and more than what we've seen in the past couple of years. Sydney, above average maximums and minimums, even though we've got all that cloud and rainfall forecast. So we are still expecting above average maximums. Same with Bankstown, maximums and minimums above average. In terms of extreme heat, we're forecasting 4 days for Sydney, so that's about average, and about 10 for Bankstown, so slightly below the average in terms of extreme heat. Canberra, above average maximums and minimum temperatures as well. And we're forecasting 6 days above 35 degrees for Canberra this year, this season. And yeah, that's quite well above what we've seen in the past couple of years as well. Brisbane, despite all that rain and cloud, we're expecting above average maximums and minimums as well. Same with Ipswich. In terms of extreme heat, Ipswich, we're expecting about 20 days above 35 degrees during this period. By the way, this is taking into account days we've already seen as well. And yeah, not so many for Brisbane. Perth, so this is a bit of a different story. For Perth, we're expecting more easterly flows with that high pressure sitting over southern Australia. So that's coming from the interior of Australia. So generally we are expecting maximums to be above average through Perth. Yes, so slightly warmer through that period. And in terms of extreme heat, this is the kind of setup where we do see a higher number of days above 35 degrees in Perth as well. So 33 days is on the forecast this season. So I mentioned the sea surface temperatures and humidity. You can see a lot of the blues and pinks on the left-hand side. That's showing the humidity across Australia. It looks really, really humid in the next couple of months or so. Yeah, that's based on these sea surface temperatures. So it looks like it could be an exceptionally humid summer, particularly at the end parts of summer for Sydney and Brisbane. It could be quite oppressive with days. Yeah, really sticky conditions could make those temperatures feel much hotter than average. Sunshine anomalies. So this forecast is quite good in my mind. So the left-hand side, this is showing December to February's below average sunshine anomalies through the west, central parts of Australia, and also eastern parts as well. February and April, you can see, yeah, through New South Wales and parts of southeast Queensland, below average sunshine anomalies as well. Heavy rainfall and flooding, so not a surprise, we've got the warm sea surface temperatures injecting a lot of moisture. We've got that La Nina-like pattern, which could increase the risk of heavy rainfall and flooding across the east and north in particular. On the right-hand side, the blues are kind of showing areas that, I guess, rivers and dams are quite full already. So if we see any kind of heavy rainfall events over those, that's where we could see an increased risk of flooding, particularly in those floodplains. Strong wind events, I've kind of alluded to this already, but we're expecting more phases of positive SAM. Doesn't mean we won't get cold fronts. We will get strong wind events coming through this summer, but generally on average, we're expecting a lower frequency of strong wind events this summer. Thunderstorms, so across large parts of the country, we're expecting an increased risk of storms. Those sea surface temperatures are providing a lot of moisture. Thunderstorms love humid environments. They also love warm environments. So we're expecting increased risk of thunderstorms this season. We have seen a lot already. In terms of risks, it looks like the main risk will be, obviously we can get hail and damaging winds with all of these thunderstorms, but in summer, the highest risk would be heavy rainfall events associated with these thunderstorms. Now let's talk about bushfires. So as you know, AFAC haven't put out their forecast just yet, but let's look at the soil moisture. It looks like southern parts of Australia are quite dry in terms of soil moisture. The rainfall deficiencies across those areas are also, we've got some serious or lowest on record deficiencies through those areas. So in my mind, for the summer forecast, we're expecting that bushfire risk will continue to be above average in western parts of Victoria, southeastern parts of New South Wales, southeastern parts of SA as well. We could see that area extended a bit further, in my mind, in terms of that soil moisture and those rainfall deficiencies through there. You can see that they've only got a small section in the southeast. My forecast is that they'll extend that a little bit. Potentially, we could see an increase in southwestern parts of WA as well. And when the monsoon arrives across northern Australia, that's where we could see that decreased risk in that area. I thought I'd just touch on cyclones for Australia. So cyclones love warm oceans. So yes, we have that this season, but generally we have seen a bit of a downward trend in tropical cyclones in the Australian region because of climate change. So that's what's kind of offsetting this season. So we're forecasting about average to slightly above average cyclone activity this season for Australia. We are expecting a higher proportion of severe tropical cyclones based on those warm sea surface temperatures. So every degree warmer these sea surface temperatures are, the more energy these cyclones can have to develop into severe cyclones. So in summary, temperatures, minimums above average, maximums, I guess, are closer to average, but still above average. South Australia and the west coast of WA look warmer. Feels like temperatures look like they'll be much warmer than average due to humidity. Heat waves, South Australia and WA look hot, risk of heat waves. Victoria, normal risk. For the east coast, we're expecting below normal risk. Eastern Australia could see some prolonged periods of warm nights and humid days though. Rainfall above average in the north and east in particular, or even parts of central could see more rainfall. Heavy rainfall and flooding, higher risk, particularly in the north and the east parts of Australia. Wind events below normal risk, storms above average risk, and bushfire risk. We could see an increased risk in parts of Western Victoria, southeastern parts of South Australia, potentially southwestern WA as well. Any questions?
Yes, I've got a question. It's Brian Massey from South Australia, and I can tell you and vouch for you around Adelaide and the coastal areas of SA, it is extremely dry as per the model you had there. The question I've actually got is that do you think on the IOD, when we get neutral and negative conditions, that we're seeing a bit of a change here in terms that the general ocean conditions are warming such that you're not actually seeing a cooling of the Arabian Sea versus average and the warming of the Eastern Indian Ocean, but rather you've got more of a relative condition where it's still warmer than average in the Arabian Sea, but it's well above average on the eastern side of the Indian Ocean, and that's sort of changing what would be the normal anticipated impact of the IOD. I always just wondered that over the course of this season, just seeing how warm the temperatures are across the whole ocean, and some commentary on that if you've got any.
Yeah, so they actually don't. So I was speaking about so we do have a relative Nino 3.4 index, which actually takes into account the warmer oceans across the whole of the globe and global warming. As far as I know, they don't have an index for the Indian Ocean dipole, but I think we need to start moving towards that, because yes, it is impacting. It is impacting the index in terms of what we're actually seeing eventuate in Australia. In terms of this IOD event, it looks like in the next couple of weeks we'll see the MJO move into the Indian Ocean as well. So that's probably going to disrupt this pattern as well. But in the past couple of weeks, we have seen those warm oceans of the northwest provide a decent amount of moisture to parts of WA and even South Australia, and cloud bands move across. So yes, it is. I think it is influencing our weather, and I expect it to in the next couple of weeks or so before that MJO and the monsoon arrives. But yeah, in terms of a typical impact, I would say that it's not a fully fledged event, so I wouldn't say it's a typical impact. I hope that helps.
Well, if you can send some rain down this way, that'd be very welcome.
Yeah, it is very dry.
Thank you so much, Ashley. That was great. And to Michael for his presentation. Now we have time left for questions. Anyone wants to pop their hand up, come off mute, pop something in the chat, please. We have time. Otherwise, as Michael said, both presentations will be published on the AEMO website along with the recording of this meeting. And once they are online and live, I will send out an email to everyone with the link so you can all see them. That'll probably be tomorrow. But there might not be any questions. That just means your presentations were too good and had all the information everybody needed.
I hope so.
Okay, well, looks like there's no more takers. Thank you, Brian, for our question. And thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for coming this afternoon. We might see you later at the Swiss presentation for the WA system. I can put a link in the chat for register for that if you haven't and you would like to come along and hear about that. Otherwise, thank you, everyone, for coming. It's been a pleasure, and I will email you with the link when they're online. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks all.
Thank you.